Welcome back, and of course, the biggest news this afternoon is the 2025 budget statement presented to Parliament and the content therein. Now, a few minutes ago, I walked you through the expenditure and the revenue government is projecting to receive in 2025, the expenditure and the appropriation, all amounting to 290.9 billion Ghana cedis. Now, but what are some of the key findings? What are some of the key issues that came up during the presentation by the Finance Minister, Dr. Ato Forson? My colleague, Kofi J, is in the studio with me. Let us break it down for you and make it more understandable. Kofi, so what do we have today?
Well, so Elton, Ghana's economy is troubling, but we will fix it. That's the assurance that we are getting from the Finance Minister, Dr. Ato Forson, who says that we are not out of the woods yet, but he is assuring the people of Ghana that this troubling economy will be fixed. And he made a number of commitments, promises that his government, after the appropriation is passed, possibly we are going to see them come into fruition. But what we are also learning from the budget is some troubling numbers. I mean, the economy is troubling anyway, but there are certain numbers that he mentioned that for us are very troubling, that as a country in 2024, if you look at the total expenditure versus the revenue, usually the difference is what we call the deficit.
Right.
How much is left for you to be able to meet your total revenue. So the deficit, I mean, in terms of the revised figure, was somewhere around, let's say, 43 billion Ghana cedis when it was indicated in the mid-year budget of 2024. Now, the Finance Minister is giving an update of how much the year ended, and I am shocked that we are moving from this projected figure of 43 billion Ghana cedis to 93 billion Ghana cedis of deficit. If you do the math and possibly want to put it in dollar terms, we will be talking about some $8 billion of deficit in 2024. The key question is, what did governments use this money for? And we've always said that during election years, government will come with a beautiful promise, but after the elections are over and we begin to open the coffin, that's when you see the bones. And this is the bone that the Finance Minister is showing us this today, that our deficit went as high as 93 billion Ghana cedis. And if you do the math, that's when you see the increase of close to 50.1 billion Ghana cedis being added to the projected figure. We are still trying to find answers of how government was able to move from this amount
to 92.
To that amount.
I mean, to simplify it, the government spent 92 billion cedis more
than what it projected.
The projected. So where did the money come from?
That is
loans or what?
Exactly. So what we saw was that if you look at the 2024, the latter part of the year, there were some expenditure line items that the Finance Minister, Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, was actually expecting. He was expecting some 1.5 billion US dollars from cocoa syndicated loans and a number of other revenues. But what we know is that the cocoa syndicated loan didn't come to fruition. So they had to rely on the treasury bill market. And the Finance Minister said it today that if you look at what they inherited in terms of the treasury bills that the SWA administration had borrowed, they were very huge. And possibly that's what accounted for this huge figure. But what we know is that we had elections, and the elections actually dragged. We know some of the chaos that actually happened, especially at the parliamentary level. And when we saw the EC budget that was running in excess of 300 million Ghana cedis, we said that this would definitely go above the scheduled figure of more than 300 million Ghana cedis. Now we are learning that we spent close to 93 billion Ghana cedis, more than we even projected in 2024, especially in an election year. I
mean, look at it this way. Yeah. I mean, in the same 2024, the latter part of 2024, government undertook a lot of commissioning of projects.
Exactly.
Flyovers, roads, others. Could this explain,
in fact,
where the funding came from?
That is very spot on. Very spot on. Especially if you look at the General Hospital, for instance. The Finance Minister was very categorical that this is a hospital that is not going to be funded by anybody. Government itself will find money and finance the hospital. We've been looking at the status of the hospital, although it's not done yet, but you can see that the infrastructure work, I mean, we are at a very appreciable level, and you wonder how government was able to raise that money to fund the hospital. What we were told was that at the latter part of the year, the fourth quarter of the year, because of the restructuring exercise that we did, most of the road projects were stalled. But it was interesting to see how government was able to finish almost all the roads. I mean, you can talk about the commission them, yes. The flower pot interchange. I think there was the Obechebi Lamte, and a number of them that were actually commissioned. And the key question was, how did government find the money to pay? And also, we know that government also had to find some almost 6.9 billion, I think, Ghana cedis to pay, those who had bought the bonds and had suffered from the restructuring, and government had to pay them because there was some sort of commitment. Yeah. All of those monies possibly added to the high deficit we are seeing.
So now we are seeing the true picture. The true picture of how 2024 ended.
Now, in fact, this for me is also very huge.
Before you move on, you know, when we pass the public financial management bill, there's a provision that says that if a finance minister goes beyond a certain threshold, that finance minister can be liable for prosecution.
Exactly.
Now, with this expenditure, this deficit, that is way above the 5%.
It's way above the 5% of the previous year's GDP.
That is accepted. The last time the law was abused and we looked the other way was the fact that we were in COVID era and then certain things were sidestepped. Now, in this case, the finance minister then, Dr. Amin Adam, obviously went beyond the 5% threshold, meaning that he put himself in a position where he could be held liable for overspending. Well,
so in this period, you have twin finance ministers. You had the former finance minister, taking the first part of the year, and I think Amin Adam's coming in later. And in fact, this really goes beyond the 5% threshold that has been set in the law. And it will be interesting to see how we are going to go about it. The finance minister said that it was beyond, but never said anything about some of the actions they are going to take in terms of getting those who were involved possibly punished. Because this, I remember when Kenneth Oforiatta assumed office in 2017, and he was being asked about revenue and expenditure and how government is going to close the gap. He said, I think around that time they had introduced the law and all of that, and he said he knows that if he goes beyond that, his job will be at risk and he could be punished for that. But it turns out that he spent almost close to 7 years in office and was never punished for overspending. Interesting to see how that the last year of the NPP administration, how deficits have ballooned. In fact, when the IMF, they come back to town again for the April review, which is just a month away, they will be exposed to the true picture of the country's deficit. It will be interesting to see the kind of stories that the current finance minister and the BOG governor will tell them in terms of the expenditure. But this year, again, they're estimating a similar figure of 43.8 billion Ghana cedis in terms of deficit. We are not done with the year. But they say, so it will be interesting to see how when 2025 ends and the finance minister is about to present the 2026 budget, the kind of true picture he will paint about the deficit in terms of, the difference between revenue and expenditure.
He's looking at 43.8, spending 43 more. And then, I think it ties in with total revenue and grants, 223.8 billion. And then total expenditure, 269. So meaning we'll spend more than we'll receive.
Yeah. but I mean, it's always interesting that you always have the leeway when you are talking, right? But in terms of implementation, when the reality dawns on you and all the commitments you have made.
Exactly.
And we were counting the number of commitments. It's in excess of 24. And that will cost the state some 54 billion Ghana cedis. It is interesting to see how the finance minister will find money to do that, talking about allocating almost 100 million Ghana cedis to, assembly members in terms of the allowances and all of that. some of these things are novel. We've not seen them in our budgets. But, I mean, looking at the kind of deficits, they've been able to find a nice way to stay within the belt. But the discipline will always come maybe after the first half of the year, and it's coming to Parliament for the mid-year budget. It will be interesting to see if he will ask for supplementary budget or he will decide to stay within his means. What we know is that usually when the government is under an IMF program, supplementary budget is usually reduced a bit and they stay within their means. But I don't understand how the IMF actually watched on for our deficit to balloon from 42 billion Ghana cedis to almost 92 billion. I mean, how are we going to fund this kind of deficit that the government is projecting in 2025? He said that, look, we know that we've been shut out of the international capital market, but we still have the multilateral organizations or agencies who are still with us. So we are expecting some $720 million from the IMF, some $600 million from the World Bank, all of them coming together to support this year's budget.
Zero from the African Development Bank.
Exactly, African Development Bank. Why? Because their funding ended in 2024. Yes. They were very instrumental in supporting the government when we went into that deep economic crisis in 2022 and we had to go for the IMF program in 2023. They supported the 2023 budget with some $60 million and $44 million for the 2024 budget. But just like you put it, it will be zero this year and then zero next year. Mm-hmm. So we possibly don't expect any sort of funding from the African Development Bank, but we have the assurance from the World Bank
and the
IMF that we'll get some money. And we did the math and we realized that out of the $3 billion bailout package from the IMF, we have actually withdrawn some $1.9 billion already. And the amount left at the moment is around $1.1 billion. We'll take some $720 million this year and the remaining in, I think, $380 million next year. So that tells you that the money we are possibly getting from the IMF is taking a nosedive.
Yes.
And he made mention of the strategy behind the DDEP program and how we moduled the debt servicing obligation. And he said that it looks as if 2027 and 2028 were actually programmed to be debt servicing years. And I think 2026 too is also part. But if you look at all of these problems and how the IMF, loans to us, taking a nosedive, the World Bank and everything, as whether next year government will be negotiating for a top-up IMF program and whether they will be requesting for more money. It won't be, new if they decide to do that. The NPP administration did same in 2018, 2019.
For an extension.
Exactly. They did an extension of the program. And we understand that there are sub-Saharan African countries who are also negotiating for an extended period of the IMF program. Kenya is doing so after benefiting from more than $6 billion, bailout package from the IMF. They are saying that that was not enough. They are looking for another form of program from the IMF. So we don't know if government is going to do that. But in terms of the deficit, we are all painting a picture of. The finance minister said that they are looking at both the T-bill market and the bonds market to finance this. T-bill market, we know that the rate has come down. But when you speak to experts, some say that the strategy is that the IMF expect that government should gradually come back to the bonds market this year, starting next quarter, and it should be gradual and carefully executed. Now, the government is saying that they will come back to the market, but definitely, if you are reducing the T-bill rate, you are making that market less attractive. So it means that if you are introducing the bond market, you need to come up with very lucrative interest rates for people to be able to go into that market. Because already you are rejecting a number of bids in the treasury bill space. And people are saying that, what is the alternative for investors? For if you are an investor and you are watching us in the local space, governments will be relying on you heavily to finance their deficit. They are supposed to start, coming back to the the domestic bond market coupled with the treasury bill market. And when you talk about abolishment of taxes and abolishing taxes, he has affirmed or confirmed that all the taxes they promised in their 2024 manifesto will go. Now, at the moment, they still use the word we will. That is
because the process must take place in Parliament.
Exactly.
I mean, the various laws, the excise duty amendment will have to come for the amendments to take place before they can remove these taxes. But now it remains a proposal. Parliament must take a decision to amend the laws backing these taxes before it can go.
Now, you put it right. Now, that is the reason why when he was starting his statement, remember, he made mention that he is seeking for some sort of amendment. And we counted them, and there were about 10 amendments that he is seeking for. And most of them are towards taxes and revenue. And it will be interesting to see how this travel, the time part of this amendment will travel, whether they'll face any form of frustration from the minority. Because we all understand when the minority introduced the E-Levy, or the Akufo-Addo administration introduced the E-Levy in 2023, appropriation or passing that bill became a problem.
Right.
And possibly we don't know if we will face this sort of situation at the moment. But, I mean, experts say that they have the numbers and they can actually push through, you know, I mean, if you look at all the taxes that government says they will, you know, scrap, one thing that is a bit new and possibly we are learning is this one, abolishment on motor vehicles. I mean, the VAT on motor insurance, right? And I remember how drivers and owners of vehicles used to lament when in the 2024 budget or so, this model was actually introduced, and people said that it was going to increase the insurance that drivers were paying. And I spoke to some people who said that, I mean, even if you are using an old vehicle, you can pay as high as 500 cedis per year.
Yes.
And that's also very, I mean, if you're a tractor driver, if you're a vehicle owner, and you possibly see this sort of assurance from the finance minister, I'm sure that you'll be happy. But we were able to quantify, we've been quantifying all the tax handles that the government will be, I mean, scrapping. And we said that they could be losing in excess of some 7 billion Ghana cedis. 7 billion. Yes, but we've also done the math for the decoupling of some of the funds, I mean, the revenue handles. Remember, they said that they are going to uncap Govt fund, uncap the NHIL for them to be used for their specific purposes. What is the financial, you know, benefit that the government, what financial benefit that the government get from these two, you know, tax handles? I'm talking about the Govt fund levy and the NHIL. If you look at the 2024 budget, the estimation was that the year should end around some 7.9 billion Ghana cedis for each of these two tax handles. Yes. And you look at the growth part of these two tax handles, it could go as high as, let's say, 8 billion or 9 billion Ghana cedis for each of them. So that means that if government is able to uncap them and they have the revenues in the form that they were introduced, they could have access to some 20 billion Ghana cedis in revenue. This could be one of the ways that they will use to plug the holes in terms of the tax cut they've seen. Also, we know that government, the finance minister was very heavy on, you know, tax refunds. And he said that they've been able to get a lot from tax refunds. Yeah. And so they're going to continue this year, and they hope to get more from that. If you add these two, this could actually be a good way that the government can use to, you know, plug the hole in terms of the kind of revenue that they have lost. Debt servicing obligation definitely will be very, very key. And he says that if you look at the domestic space, right, or the debt servicing obligation for the entire year, that could hit somewhere 150.3 billion, you know, Ghana cedis. And some say that this can be more. I mean, you only have this beautiful or less picture on the screen because you are anticipating that inflation will be low and the cedi will perform well against the dollar. But if the cedi begins to misbehave, you definitely
will have to pay more.
Might pay more.
We thank you so much, and I guess there'll be more for us to chew on in the hours and days to follow, because this is